Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoy video. Ryan here, and on my own, because Jonas was busy today, and he's saving up all his energy for the probably three faction-focused reviews that he's got coming up for his own armies. Specifically, we know for a fact Soulblight, as predicted, is tomorrow, and then I'm expecting the remaining two Order armies, Seraphon and Sylvaneth, in one order or the other, to be Monday and Tuesday. Which means next week we should have probably Khorne on Wednesday to keep in line with the Chaos God thing. And then probably, let's see, Thursday would be Iron Jaws, since today's Kruleboyz. And then Friday would probably be Slaves to Darkness to round things out, if they're doing things kind of in line with what they've been doing. But anyway, today is Kruleboyz. And for those of you at home, there has been a discussion that... even though this probably was the most likely way they were going to split up the Orruk Warclans and give us the promised 24 armies, even though this is probably the most logical way, that it was just going to become Kruleboyz as its own faction and then Ironjaws as its own faction, a lot of people were saying that wasn't going to be, and then we'd get a new army or something, and I just think this was too obvious. But anyway... So if you weren't paying attention, we basically had 24 different battle tomes leading up to the squatting, and technically we still do have 24 different battle tomes. But that was really 23 armies, plus the 24th book, if you want to call it that, was Orruk Warclans, and depending on who you asked, it would have anywhere between 1 to 4 armies inside of it. If you're the kind of person like me that likes to think of things as books, and books are what determines how many armies there are, then it was only 1. If you saw Ironjaws, Bone Splitters, and Kruleboyz as separate entities, but Big Waaagh as a soup army, then we had 26. Or if you saw Big Waaagh as its own thing, which kind of made sense, then it bumped all the way up to 27. But of course, we've learned in the meantime that not only are Beasts of Chaos and Bone Splitters going away, which would bring us down to, let's say we did the max there, 27 down to 25, but then we're also probably losing Big Waaagh. And we don't know what the current allies and coalition system is going to be, but as it was before, it was kind of a way that you could use all the best battle traits maybe from each of those 3 Orruk sub-factions in one faction, and you could just mix and match however you liked. And it had a lot of flexibility, especially in 3rd edition, the end of 3rd edition, the Magic season that we're in right now, where they had gotten some like freebie battle tactics basically, and it just became real easy to score those battle tactics. But anyway, I have every reason to think that we're down to 24, that it's Kruleboyz, Ironjaws, and that's it. Which actually means Destruction has, if you saw it as 4 books before, now we probably will get a separate whole book when the battle tomes come out for Kruleboyz and Ironjaws separately, which means we actually have 1 extra book now. So we went from 24 books, and then it replaced, Beast of Chaos, plus 1 and then minus 1, so we're back to 24 individual books. But we do have 1 extra Destruction book, is what I guess I'm getting at, and 1 less Chaos book. But in any case, we're going to be talking about Kruleboyz today. I'm actually pretty excited about this one, although the review for me is kind of meh. Spoiler alert. But I, like a lot of people that bought the Dominion boxes and some of the other things that came out at the beginning of 3rd, I have a few Kruleboyz models that I just haven't built yet, and I really wish I'd gotten that Christmas box a couple years ago, I don't think it was this last Christmas, maybe. I think it was 2 Christmases ago, that had like 1 copy each of the big monsters, plus it had some bow guys and some regular troops. It seemed like a real great deal, and I was this close to buying 2 boxes of it so that I'd have the named version and the generic version of each of the monsters, and then some other stuff, plus all the stuff that I got in the boxes. But I didn't pull the trigger, and this review is not necessarily making me think that it was a bad decision, but at the same time, I would like to play this army, and now that there's their own thing, and they haven't really had that much love in 3rd edition, which is their whole existence. They came out at the beginning of the launch. They were kind of like the Orruk launch army, if you will, along with Stormcast. They just haven't had a whole lot of love. The Bow's version of things had been pretty good for a while, but then it just kind of fell off. yeah, I just don't think the army really knew, or GW knew where to put the army. And we're hoping with this faction focus that it gives it more of an identity. So without further ado, let's get into it. But guys, don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe. We've been getting so much more attention now that we've been not only regular, which helps the algorithm, but also that we hopefully are seen as a decently reliable source of faction-focused reviews as soon as they come out. And well, we're going to try to keep up as good of a pace as we can once the those stop and we get some other rules coming out. But obviously it's going to slow down a little bit. Please, in the meantime, feel free to like, share, and subscribe all this stuff so that we can keep that word out. And I'd love to hit 3,000 subscribers sooner than later, so that would be amazing. But anyway, thank you to all of our new subscribers and old alike. Let's get on to those battle traits. So, let's see. There was one thing that they used to have that was basically the venom-encrusted weapons. It's now called something else, which you'll see in the upper right-hand corner here. Or it's got the name is the same, but it's been moved on to a different ability. It used to basically be that they all did crit mortals on 6s to hit, even for shooting attacks, as long as it wasn't companions or mounts or whatever. And it did, unlike a lot of crit mortals, it did an amount of damage equal to the damage characteristic, which is exactly how it is now. So those, as you can expect, have largely been moved onto the War Scrolls. We'll see some exceptions, but mostly that is just to be found on War Scrolls. And then the rest of what we see here is the Dirty Tricks rules. Now, I should mention right before I get into that they did lose the Kruleboyz Wah, but I don't remember anyone ever really pulling this off. It was a once per game Wah ability, like all the Orruk factions had, where you would pick your general to fight, and then as soon as he fought, the two other friendly Kruleboyz units, Holier Than 18, could fight right after him, which is kind of cool. But like, it's just the army wasn't exactly a combat army necessarily; it was more of a shooting thing, and they wanted to play more tricksy. I think this is, of all the rules to lose, it's probably the easiest one to give up. That said, the Dirty Tricks rules we're about to see have changed like in a big way. How it used to work is at the beginning of the game, basically, you got to pick originally one dirty trick to use during the whole battle, but then they bumped it up to 2 different dirty tricks. And these abilities were different than the ones we're going to go through here. One of them was just a static ability for -1 to wound in the first battle round, including against shooting. But the other 3 were you'd roll 3 dice. For each 4+, you'd get some kind of buff or debuff to enemy unit or whatever. I'm not going to go through all that right now. I don't think, but that's kind of how we set the stage. Now, instead, what you're doing is you got this passive ability in the upper left-hand corner that says you can use 1 dirty trick ability per phase. Now, don't get too ahead of yourself, because we have a dirty trick, and you'll see they have the keyword here for the hero phase, movement phase, charge, and combat. Now, 3 of those are in any version of that, so it could be in your opponent's version of those. But this one right here is only your hero phase. So in your turn, considering you can only do each one of these abilities once per turn army, you're getting max 4 of these off. And in your opponent's turn, you're getting max 3, which would be all but this one up here. Now, how it works is that you basically decide you're going to use one. And you need to keep track of how many in the battle round you've already attempted. I'd probably keep a dice somewhere on the side to keep track of that so everyone can know. On the first attempt, you get your attempt off on a 2+. So let's say you do them on your turn. You try to do all 4. So you do the hero phase 1. That goes off on a 2+. Your second attempt that you try to do in that battle round is on a 3+, then a 4+, then a 5+ for all subsequent. So that would mean if you tried to do all 7 in one battle round, you'd have 1 on a 2+, 1 on a 3+, 1 on a 4+, and then 4, the remaining 4 would be on 5+. Now, you might be thinking, well, what if I fail the roll? Does it still count as my first? Is it checking for whether it was successful or not, or whether I even attempted it? And so if we look at the rule, says your army can use 1 dirty trick ability per phase. The effect of a dirty trick ability is only applied if you make a successful dirty trick roll. The success of a dirty trick roll depends on the number of dirty trick abilities your army has already used this battle round. So the success of the effect of the ability, which is down here, is dependent on the roll. But whether or not you used this ability has nothing to do with the roll. It happens just because you attempted. So if you could try 7 attempts in one battle round and fail every single one, technically. But I think you'll probably get one off. That said, the first one's the one you're most likely to get off. So then it's a uphill battle from there maybe. But anyway, so what we're looking at here is then you've got to be careful with your timing. You could, of course, wait until you've gotten everything up to a the exact moment for the one thing you very much want to go, and then it's on a 2+. But you could say, well, I'd really like to use a couple of these. Then you have to start thinking strategically about what your chances are. And obviously the later they are in the phase or in the turn, like let's say it's your opponent goes first. You might be tempted to use one of these things, but then obviously that makes it, if you use a couple of them, then by the time you get to your turn, they're not very reliable. Obviously the same goes the other way around, but maybe the ones in your turn you have more control over because you're the one moving, you're the one charging, all that stuff. But let's take a look at what they are before we get too deep into that line of thinking. So I'll do them in phase order. So this is the only one that only can happen in your turn, but it lasts until your next turn. So you pick a friendly Kruleboyz infantry unit, important there, and then you make the roll. If it's successful, until the start of your next turn, the target's attacks score critical hits on unmodified hit rolls of 5+. So let's talk about what units this is impacting, because this army actually has a decent number of monsters on the big guys, and it has cavalry in the form of one of the heroes we're going to see later. So we're not seeing this applicable to the Gobsprakks, Killabosses on different things, but definitely the guy on foot. We're not seeing it on, let's see, the Snatcher bosses on Sledge Raker Beasts, the Marshcrawler Slogoth probably not, the Break-a-Boss on Mirebrute Troggoth. So what are we seeing this on? Well, we're going to be seeing it on, I think if I'm not mistaken, let's scroll down. We saw this down here. Oh, it won't say what name it was. Oh, it's a War Machine. So the Killbow would also not apply, assuming it keeps that same keyword. So we're not seeing it on the Killbow. We could see it on the Bolt Boys, but most likely those are going to be crit auto wounds instead of mortal wounds. We should see it on the Hobgrot Slittas. We should see it on all of the foot heroes. So that would be like the Swamp Caller Shaman, the Killaboss on foot, and the Murknob Shaman, or just Murknob. And then the Gutrippaz, which is your basic battle line. And as far as I'm aware, that's it. So this ability might seem really good, but I think the units that are going to be targetable for this are maybe not the juiciest targets you could be hoping for. So that infantry word does a whole lot of heavy lifting there in the kind of wah-wah department. Okay, let's move on to the movement phase. So this is once per turn. It could be in your opponent's turn. You pick an infantry unit, and now there's a stipulation of 10 or fewer models that's not in combat. But then you get to teleport them. They have to be wholly within 3 inches of a terrain feature when they land, and just as typical, outside of 9. Remember, if they're set up that turn, they can't move in that phase, but they could charge. Now, this is obviously great for your shooting units, and if I'm not mistaken, let me double check that real quick, that the shooter guys, the man-skewer Bolt Boys, yeah, they come in units of 3, so you could only make them as big as a unit of 6 anyway. So teleporting them and then putting them in range to get some really juicy shots off is pretty great. You could do this, of course, with some of your like regular infantry, the like kind of battle line-y units like the Gutrippaz. They come in MSU of 10 normally, and then it was what was the other one? The Hobgrot Slittas. They come in 10s as well. At least they did. I could see them changing their MSU to 20 because they're that type of horde unit. So obviously, as long as a unit stays 10 or less, it could do this, and then all those foot heroes could teleport, which is great for stealing an objective, but of course it's wholly within 3 of a terrain feature, which could be a bit restrictive if they're on bigger bases or you have to fit a lot of models. And then keep in mind, we also have to keep coherency. But being able to do that in your opponent's phase is really great. And if you haven't, used a dirty trick yet, it goes off on a 2+. So pretty awesome. Then we have a charge phase 1. Again, this could be in your opponent's turn and your turn. Pick an enemy unit that charged this turn and is in combat with any friendly Kruleboyz. So now this doesn't have a restriction on the Kruleboyz units, and we'll see this also with the next ability. But it does with the type of unit that charged. It has to have charged. It has to be an enemy unit. Obviously, if we do have allies, then this wouldn't be applicable if they landed in combat without, somehow without Kruleboyz units. But we, again, don't know anything about allies or coalition right now. So obviously, this is more likely to happen your opponent's turn than your turn. But if they do a counter charge, it could also take place in your turn. So what it does is you do D3 mortal damage when, after they've done that, assuming the roll goes off. And then in addition for the rest of the turn, if they had charge +1 damage on the charging unit, so usually cavalry, they don't get to use it. That could actually be a huge difference for some cav units, but I don't know if we've seen enough to have kind of a sense for how often we're going to be coming up against this. It's decent enough to do D3 mortal wounds on, but if they're not getting that other ability, I don't know if I'm like jumping to do this. Now remember, if you do hit the 5+ on these things, you might as well do it, right? Now you can only do each one of these once per turn, or once per phase, I should say, but also once per turn. So if you've already gotten to that point where you've tried for your fourth and subsequent one, then why not? If you want to do some D3 mortal wounds, even if it doesn't have the extra debuff. But this is maybe less important to me. I think the teleport one is maybe the go-to. But the combat one's not bad. Same story. Pick an enemy unit in combat with any friendly Kruleboyz units. And if the roll goes off, they have Strike Last. Now, Strike Last it's always worth saying, it's great if the unit that you have can do enough damage to whittle them down so that when they fight back, they're not doing enough to make a difference. But we don't know what kind of melee situation this army is going to have. This is probably better on your big monster type units, assuming they have decent output, than like your Gutrippaz. That's not really the main target for this. But again, if you're already up to fourth and subsequent attempt, might as well try. Why not? Giving something Strike Last, if you got enough guys that can team up on it and take it down, then that could be a thing. And keep in mind, Kragnos should be getting the Kruleboyz keyword. Why? Because we've seen Nagash, when we first saw his War Scroll, they said, hey, he's got the OBR keyword on him, but he's not necessarily going to be OBR in every single case. He's going to get the keyword of each faction he's in. So Kragnos should be getting the keyword for every army he's in, meaning this would work for Kragnos, and that's definitely a beat stick that would be worthy of looking at. I don't know that, no, he wouldn't qualify for really, I mean, this, sure, but who cares? So anyway, that's kind of interesting. The stuff they lost, like I said, I'm not really going to go into, but I really do feel like this is probably overall more tactically interesting, even if it might be more restrictive with the infantry stuff than it looks on paper. Okay, so let's move on to battle formation here. This will be the Kruleboyz Claw, and as far as I'm aware, this is kind of replacing Grin and Blades. But friendly Kruleboyz units that are wholly within 3 inches of a terrain feature are not visible to enemy units that are more than 12 inches away from them. Not being visible is great because it's more than just not being visible for shooting. It's also not visible against magic and other abilities that need visibility. Now, you have to be wholly within 3 inches of a terrain feature, but it does apply to all of your models. So, again, could be Kragnos. So being wholly within 3 inches of a terrain feature are not visible to enemy units that are not more than 12, or that are more than 12 inches away is good depending on the terrain setup on the board. Now, I was thinking just now that the Kragnos situation, there is a possibility that they say that the god models that can be in all the armies, I'm forgetting what Nagash's War Scroll said right now. It could even say it on Kragnos's. I can try to take a look back. But that they can't use the battle traits. If that is the case, then take back everything I just said, but it's just now occurring to me. Let's see if I can pull up Kragnos real quick. Where was that big boy? Oh yeah, with Sons. Let's see. I thought he was with Sons. No, maybe he was with Ogres. That's where he was. Okay, where are we at? Here we go. Kragnos. No, I don't see anything that says that. So for the time being, let's assume you can. Okay? All right, let's move on. So they got a spell. The spell used to exist, but it's changed now. I think it's same casting value, but it lost some range. It used to be a point you picked within 24 inches, and then it created a 6-inch area of effect around that point that gave a keyword to, or like gave an effect to all the units that were around it. And then they received -1 attack to a minimum of 1, which we, for all intents and purposes, believe is actually going to be in the core rules now. So don't read too much into that on what we see here. And also gave them they couldn't run, if I'm not mistaken. Let's check that. Yeah, but it was only -1 to attack for melee weapons. Now it does impact their shooting profiles as well, missile profiles. But the range is wholly within 18, and remember, you're choosing a visible enemy unit, which is rare. They've mostly changed this to being just within, so that you can't kind of get locked out of that. So that's a little rough. But remember, you do have that movement teleport to not set up for a what's it called? A spell in your turn, because that was in the movement phase, but maybe get you ready for this in the next turn. That said, it's only subtracting 1 from the tax characteristic, and if they just have a tax characteristic of 1, it's probably not making that big of a difference at the end of the day. I kind of feel like this should have been an unlimited spell, but evidently there will be an unlimited spell somewhere else. So, I don't know. We'll see. But I feel like this is okay, but it definitely got nerfed from what it once was. I don't know if this was a popular spell for Kruleboyz players, but it seems strong enough. I want to take a look real quickly at the other formations. I skipped over that. So they said they've got one with bolts ready for range units to pick off distant targets. Okay, so maybe you get longer range on your shooting lists. And that was always a thing that they had. I think it was like plus 3 inches shooting range, something like that. Let's see, focus on stealth and mobility to better ambush. I love that. Or go to battle with a menagerie of fearsome war beasts. So a monster-heavy one, which also is right up my alley. So those sound fun. Okay, let's move on to the units. So we got Gobsprakk. This is like your War Master, big named character. It's kind of the corollary for what Ironjaws have is Gordrakk. This is Gobsprakk. Let's see, what changed on Gobsprakk? I got some notes here. Lost 2 inches of move from top bracket, but like we've seen with a lot of things, it's equivalent to its second best bracket, so I wouldn't complain too much about that. It's still got the same wheel otherwise, and a 6+ ward built in, and still a 2-level wizard. Now, the weapon profile here, on the Rider, you'll notice, first let's look at this. So we see crit mortals are here and crit mortals are here. It used to be that both of these profiles had crit mortals, so that kind of sucks on this. But I'll go ahead and tell you, I did the math on the main profile, the brackets here, and it's still basically coming out on top from what it did before because it got +2 attacks. And then when it gets bracketed, it just goes back to what it used to be, albeit the hit and wound on this, it actually kept the same hit and it just got +1 to wound. I would say this unit, it always had this weird problem of being kind of too easy to kill for a big monster. It was a 5+ save and a 6+ ward, but he wasn't doing that much damage in combat. And now the damage, especially on that talons and beak, have been boosted. Let's see, how much did this guy used to cost? Gobsprakk was 240 as of this moment, which is actually pretty cheap for this big of a monster. But he had his tech that he brought with what was down here, which more or less has stayed the same, is still really solid. Okay, and then he did technically, the Rider did technically lose this little backup stabber, which is like his little guy hanging out with him, I guess. But anyway, that doesn't make a huge difference. This profile here got 1 extra attack, but lost a point of hit. It lost a point of rend, although he gets it back against a wizard. And interestingly enough, this is also anti-wizard to bump it up to 2, which it never used to have. So, yeah, decent. It's too bad it's not doing crit mortals, but it still actually does a lot of work, at especially a -2 rend. And then the Stinger was always a 1 attack kind of deal, and this didn't get bracketed at all. It's still at the 2+ that it used to be, -1 d6, and now it's doing crit mortals, and it always did this, but it's good to note that Kruleboyz was an exception here, but seeing a big damage profile here was really nice with doing mortal wounds because it just copied the amount of damage you did there. So anyway, pretty good profile. It got a buff. Let's look at its abilities here. So we got once per battle, when you are unbinding a spell, you get to use 3d6 instead of 2d6. As far as I'm aware, that's identical to what it used to be. We also have another unbinding thing over here. It's a passive ability. Each time this unit unbinds a spell, inflict d3 mortal damage on the caster, or if it unbinded it on a 10+, which could be combined with this. It doesn't say unmodified. Inflict d6 mortal damage on the caster instead. So that's identical to what it used to be. Then we've got down here, once per turn, rampage, any combat phase. And it does say Gobsprakk in the text here, so it probably is unique to him, but it could also overlap with the Killaboss on the Corpse Rip of Vulture. But you pick an enemy unit in combat, roll a dice. If it exceeds their health characteristic, one model and the target unit is slain. So this, it depends. If you're doing, like a 1 health characteristic model, then it's on a 2+, and on average, a 2+ times 1 mortal wound or mortal damage is 5/6 of a mortal damage. The best you really see is in the middle when you're going up a model against a model with a 3+ save. Then you got a 50% chance of doing 3 wounds essentially. But anyway, so kind of neat. I don't think you get to choose the model, but as far as I'm aware, he didn't have this ability before, if I'm not mistaken. And so this is new. You could argue it kind of replaces his ability, or is Gobsprakk a female? I don't know. To replace or to kind of buff redeploys, where you could re-roll redeploys if it issued it to a Kruleboyz unit, or if you issued Unleash Hell, then they didn't suffer the -1 to hit. Those are gone, unfortunately. And that was tech, but the rest of the tech is still pretty strong here. It's very anti-wizard, if you haven't been able to tell looking at its abilities. And then this last spell here, Strange Hex, is totally new for him. It might have been a War Scroll spell. I'll have to go look real quick. His old spell was basically that you added 1 to charge rolls for all Kruleboyz Orruk units on the battlefield. Some of them didn't have the Orruk keyword. And then subtract 1 from charge rolls for all other units on the battlefield, which would include your non-Kruleboyz Orruk units, which might have been rough. I don't know. That's gone. Maybe that's in the lore now. Let's see. So their lore, this is called Strange Hex. Let's see, we've got Nasty Hex. I'm not seeing it, but maybe there was somewhere else. If someone knows, put it in the comments below. But anyway, you pick a visible enemy unit within 18 inches. Roll a number of dice equal to the target's health characteristic to a max of 10. So once you hit 10 or more wounds, it doesn't have any more impact. For each 4+, inflict 1 mortal damage. I mean, it's kind of like a monster killer, not killer, but definitely soften him up. 5 wounds on average for, a 10+ wounds health characteristic model. Not bad at all. Obviously, against lower priority targets, not so much. But if you think the average foot hero has 5 health, then you're doing on average 2.5 damage, which is somewhere around. It's a little bit better than if you were doing D3, right? So, I guess that's all right. But yeah, definitely good at taking out bigger targets. So, do I think Gobsprack's amazing? Depends on his points. I think he's still got a lot of utility. Still real easy to snipe, especially with that 5+ save and only a 6+ ward. But still good. And I think the base should... I don't know. What was that roll up here? It was... not this one. Holier than 3. I have a feeling his base is too big for that. So he's not going to be able to hide himself from shooting that way. But, still, you want to find a way to protect this guy if you can. And obviously keep him around to take down some wizard armies. Yeah, I like him. Let's take a look at the Killaboss on Gnashtooth. Now, the weird thing about this guy is sometimes in armies, you see armies that have lots of cavalry, but don't seem to have a hero that's mounted on cavalry to keep up with them. And sometimes, I guess in this case, you see the other way around. You've got an army that has a guy on the cavalry, basically, but as we'll see here, wants to be buffing infantry units, but which is fine, totally fine, because we don't have any cavalry in this army, at least at this moment that I'm aware of. But especially if you don't count the mounted, like March Crawl, Slogoth type stuff, and maybe the guy who's on the Mire Brute or whatever he's called, the tall guy. He doesn't have a unit to kind of be running around the board with, which would be really cool. That would definitely be something I'd like to see them add to the range, especially now that this is its own unique army. But I can tell you right now, in short, all of his profiles basically stayed the same without any meaningful changes. This got +1 attack on the companion, and -1 to hit, and minus 1 point worse rend. What really hits these though, in particular, is they don't get the when they used to have a +1 to hit on the charge, which I guess is kind of nice. He used to also have a Kruleboyz ability, like that was within 3 inches, that they would like make them their battle shock failing less egregious. But obviously that's not a thing anymore. So what he is doing is this passive ability when he's contesting an objective you do not control. Add 1 to hit rolls for combat attacks made by friendly Kruleboyz infantry units wholly within 12 inches. You might say, "Oh, Ryan, well, there's the +1 to hit." Well, he's not infantry, so never mind. And the thing I don't know about this is only for combat attacks, so you're not going to be boosting your your shooter boys. And we're going to see the war scroll for the Gutrippaz, which just puts them on 3s and 3s. But a large chunk of what their damage is these crit mortals. This is your main like melee infantry unit. So I don't really know how essential that is. I mean, it's nice for them to be on 3 and 3s, 3s and 3s, but I don't know. I don't know what to think about that. And then he's got another ability that also he can't pick himself. Pick another friendly Kruleboyz unit, any Kruleboyz unit, wholly within 9 inches of this unit to be target. Add 3 to its control score until the start of your next turn, and you do this in your hero phase. So you could buff them up, send them off somewhere else, and then they're going to be adding 3. And that could be any Kruleboyz unit. So if it's a monster that's got control score of 5 already, then you're going up to 8. So that could be enough to hold a whole objective by itself as a monster. Could be interesting. Otherwise, I don't really have any strong thoughts about this guy. The main thing I'd like to see is that eventually they add in a cavalry unit for him to play with. Something like what was it called? The Warg Riders or whatever in Lord of the Rings. That would be pretty cool because it's kind of what this unit looks like anyway. And also the Kruleboyz in general. And then we could pull this ability off, or it could say infantry or cavalry or something like that. That would be pretty badass. But anyway, let's move on to our next hero. And this is our second time seeing something like this, but I think the first time was seeing the Fireslayer Spearhead version of the War Scroll, and then we saw that it had Control 5, and I thought maybe that's just a Spearhead thing. But someone said in the comments, hey, what if that's a totem thing? And this guy is or was a totem, and he should have Control Score 2, but he has Control Score 5, Battle Standard Bearer style. That's what they bring now, I guess, and that's pretty cool. I'm all here for it. Basically monster level. Okay, so this guy, again, the wheel is the same except for the control score. He got +1 attack, but -1 to hit. And otherwise, I think his profile is the same, but it comes out better, actually. And then he's giving a Kruleboyz, to all friendly Kruleboyz units wholly within 12 inches, a 6-up ward. So he also has a 6-up ward, so that's a buff. He didn't used to have that. It used to be a 5+ spell ignore, which I guess, that goes off, or that works on a 5 is twice as more reliable as a 6, and of course if it goes off, it stops all the mortal wounds that spell would have done. But I think ultimately a 6+ ward will add up to being more valuable. Though I've always said a 6+ ward is a little bit neither here nor there, but it's still better than nothing. Especially if your army is kind of glass cannony like these guys, or not even glass cannon, just kind of fragile, and they've already got bad saves. So it's at least guaranteeing they've got a 6+ ward. Okay, and then his ability here is exactly what it used to be. In the combat phase, you roll a die for each enemy unit in combat, which is strong. On a 1, nothing happens. 2 to 5, 1 mortal damage. And on 6, D3 mortal damage. Great ability. Can't complain. Cool that he kept it. It means you could want to send this guy into combat and, try to wreck some face, get some wounds off. And then maybe, you try to give someone strike last. I don't know. Get all your guys in. Maybe you work in conjunction with this guy to give your basic infantry the Gutrippaz a +1 to hit while this guy's there, and you give a unit strike last with the sneaky trick or whatever, a dirty trick. That could be a thing. I don't really have too much of a strong opinion about this guy other than a 6+ ward and having multiple buffs of these just kind of around your army is not bad. And if someone does need to come in with him, he's got a better profile than he used to, and this can definitely do some work, especially considering the 3-inch range. Okay, let's look at our basic battle line here. So Gutrippaz, these guys, and I say battle line, that's an old habit that's going to die hard, but you know what I mean. Just your basic kind of rank and file type troops. Coming in a unit of 10, they each have 2 wounds though. 5-up save, not so great. and they've got an ability that you roll dice in the combat phase, and if it goes off, subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by non-hero units that target this unit for the rest of that turn. It used to go off automatically, but couldn't be used on monsters in addition. So technically, as long as that monster is a non-hero monster, because it still works against heroes, then this could be -1 for non-hero monsters as well. And it's all the units it's in combat with, so that's kind of nice, I guess, if you're against multiple units, as long as they're not heroes. Now, the output, they used to have 2 profiles. One was 2-inch range, but worse, hitting on 4s and 4s, and the other one was 2 attacks, 4s and 3s, but only 1-inch range. So basically, all we did is get the better profile, because this, and then it's got 3-inch range implicitly. So a slight buff for these guys, I guess. Not too much else to say about them. It really depends on what kind of other buffs we're getting here. But this is probably one of your best targets for giving the crit mortals for an infantry unit, just because if you, let's see, I've got this written down here. Their normal profile is doing 4/9 of a wound with no rend, plus 1/3 of a wound per model, doing mortal damage. So if you've got a unit of 10 of these guys, we're looking at 4 and 4/9 with, not counting the hero, I'm just doing basic 10 regular dudes. 4 and 4/9 with no rend, and then we're looking at 3 1/3 mortal wounds. But if you put the crits on 5s, that goes, the amount that's on no rend goes down to only 2 and 2/9 at no rend. But then we're talking about 6 2/3 mortal wounds. So if you need your basic infantry unit, and imagine that you had 20 of these guys, like you reinforce them, and then of course if they've got +1 to hit from the other guy, they might be doing some decent stuff. So those mortal wounds could do something. I wouldn't count it out, but again, relatively paper thin, you know. So okay, let's move on to just the last thing here is the Beast-skewer Killbow. So this thing is a war machine now, evidently. This all stayed the same. This profile is basically kind of as though it was just one of the guys we just saw, the Gutrippaz. And then how this used to work is you had 2 different ranges, but you didn't really get to choose. What really was happening is if you didn't move, you got to use the longer range with a better to hit score. It was 2 plus 3 plus -2, 1 attack. And if you did move, you had to use the 12-inch range shot, 1 attack still, but -2 from the hit. So it was 4 plus 3 plus -2, and then a damage characteristic that we're going to talk about in a second. So what they basically did is they combined them. There's no penalty, at least on the Spearhead War Scroll, for moving anymore, so that's nice. You got double attacks. You're on the worst to hit profile here, but you got +1 to wound in any case for both profiles. The rend stayed the same. And it has a crit auto wound, which, let's see, did it have it before? Yes, it did have it before, if I'm not mistaken, doing the same amount as the damage, because they weren't a companion. But, yeah, anyway, so that does mean down here, this got the crit, because that used to be a companion. But the top, you always had, it wasn't auto wound, I should take that back. They had crit mortal wounds, and that's one of the things that's traded here. So by auto wounding, what we're seeing here is, for example, if you look at the to hit profile, this would be going off on a 5 or 6 normally. So 2, 6 times 5, 6 here. So that's 10, 36 worth from the non-auto wound. And then if you do auto wound on a 6, then what you're seeing is a 1/6 chance here, but that's times 6/6 here. So that's another 6/6. So what did I say? I said 2 times 5 is 10 plus another 6, which is 1636, or mathematically is the same as, on average over a long amount of rolls, the same as 3s and 3s. So if you want to look at it as 3s and 3s, you can, but it's, obviously working a little bit differently. the auto wound does a lot less heavy lifting if the wound roll is as good as this is. If this was like a 5, it would make a huge difference in what it did otherwise. But when it's already a 2, it's basically just preventing you from 1 out of every 6 rolls rolling a 1, right? Now, the way the damage used to work on this thing was you got at least 2 damage through, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Yes, it was 2. And then based off of the wounds characteristic of the target, you rolled a number of dice equal to how many wounds they had. So a normal hero would be 5. A monster, let's say somewhere around 10 to 15. A gargant, 35. And you rolled that many dice, and for every 5 up, you added 1 to the damage characteristic until you got 10 of those 5 ups, because you could hit a maximum of 12 with the 2 next to it added in total. Now, too long didn't read. What that meant, that on average the max you were seeing for the best version of the shot was 5 1/3 at -2 plus 2 mortal wounds coming from the venom encrusted weapons ability. So we were looking at, against like a 5-up save or worse, you're looking at 7 1/3 wounds, and then it gets bracketed down as the save keeps getting better. Now what it does is it's got an ability where the D6 damage becomes just a flat 6 if it's targeting a monster. And so against a monster, when it's doing that, it goes up to, on average, 5 1/3 wounds at -2, which matches what it used to do if you got all of those rolls off to get all the way up to 12 damage. But it lacks the mortal wounds that came with it. Now, keep in mind that what this meant as well. Let's see. Am I right about that? Hold on. 12. Yeah, that's right. So keep in mind that in order to get, because you had to roll that many dice based on the health characteristic, and then every 5 up gave you 1 extra damage characteristic. In order to get the max possible, which would be 2 plus 10 extra, that you'd have to get them 5s. Remember, your 5 up is 1/3 of the die rolls. So you'd actually need to have a health characteristic of 30 or higher to statistically, on average, actually hit this. And yes, so before the max it could reach is 5 1/3 at -2 plus 2 mortal wounds. But that was assuming on average you were going up against a gargant. And so now all it has to do to get that, something very similar to it, is going against a monster. And then it becomes a known 6 instead. You got double attacks. So ultimately my message I'm trying to get through here is this thing is way more reliable against a wider variety of targets. It's a lot less swingy, I guess, which is also good. D6 damage is bad, but if you're targeting a monster, you know it's just flat 6. And of course you could all-out attack this thing to put it up to 3s here. There might even be something we said, like there's a good chance they get extra range with that one sub-faction, and there might be a command trait or heroic trait artifact that increases the to hit. Unfortunately, it doesn't get the triggering auto wounds on 5s because it's a war machine, not infantry. But anyway, I think this thing did get improved. Now, it'll be curious to see how the Bolt Boys end up doing, because that was kind of your bread and butter in a lot of these Kruleboyz lists. So that's what we've seen today, guys. My overall impression is it looks totally fine. It doesn't look, to my eye, super buffed. The units do have a more distinct role. I wish this guy had some people that he could kind of go be alpha-y with and go across the board. Gobsprakk's doing some more damage, but kept a lot of his good stuff. I think this spell I'm mixed feelings about. This seems decent, yes. And then the battle traits, I think they're cool. I don't know if it's as good as it looks on paper, but teleporting is always fantastic, even if it's bound to terrain features. And the thing to keep in mind, again, like all of these, is yes, Krognos can be taken into consideration too, but we haven't seen what the rest of the monsters, and this has a lot of great kind of big kits, between the what do they call it? Sledge Raker Beasts, and then the other the corpse rip of Vulture. Plus we got the big guy with the cushion, the Break a Boss on Mybrute Trogoth, and then this Marshclaw Slogoth. So we've got some stuff left to see that could be real fun to play around with. So I'm curious. I'm positive about it. I feel like this falls somewhere in the middle. It's not like, I think we're right now lacking a obvious heavy hitting infantry unit, but it might still just want to be a shooting army, and that's totally fine. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think in the comments. Tomorrow is Soulblight Gravelords, which Jonas is super chomping at the bit, and I am too, I think, to cover. We're going to see if we can get that posted tomorrow night on time. And in any case, guys, thanks so much for everything you've been doing to help boost the signal. And until next time, Ryan out.